लला हम आएंगे। राम लला हम आएंगे। मंदिर वहीं बनाएंगे।
Jai Hind Mitron. Welcome to another episode of Bharatiya Janata Podcast.
भारत माता की जय.
Bharat Mata Ki Jai to you too, bro. Bharat Mata Ki Jai to you too. Never, never say never.
Yeah,
I think we should do this as our beginning every time. We should tell everybody how much we love our Bharat Mata.
and when in doubt, always Bharat Mata ki jai.
So in today's episode, we the topics that we will discuss. We have three segments. In the first segment, we will primarily focus on Ayodhya and anything around that news, how people reacted, how people felt. In the second segment, we will talk about whatever is happening in Maharashtra. Aditya will give us a rundown on how the things are looking and how does that it impact Maharashtra in their future elections. And in the last segment, we will talk about the biggest problem of the biggest problem that India is currently facing today, Nehru, and his birthday. His birthday was this week, and also the greatest hero of our times, Godse, and
Godse
his
ji.
and the day of his martyrdom, martyrdom
Godse
in
ji.
quotes. Godse ji, sorry, Godse ji, November 15. So I think let's begin. Let us start with Ayodhya. So the Ayodhya verdict came last week, and the judgment was many people said peace as at last. Many people said just resolution. Many people said let us move on, balanced judgment. All of these ideas, it seems like everybody cared so much about the fact that this must be closed, and everybody was so on the edges. Why? Because this issue was going on for so long, as if it was not the majority of this country who kept pushing on this under the whole this narrative of not hurting the communal harmony. The government kind of, I feel, has silenced a lot of opinions anyway before going into the editorial direction. So the judgment came. The judgment is that basically the disputed structure goes to the Hindus, and the Muslims will get 5 acre land somewhere in Ayodhya.
Prominent location.
In a prominent, I don't know, is there a prominent location in Ayodhya? I mean, as Trump would say, shithole is a shithole. भारत माता की जय, भारत माता की जय.
Bharat Mata ki jai.
Um, yeah, so they will get 5 acres of land in a prominent location. So this is primarily the judgment. So Aditya, first thoughts.
So I am yet to make up my mind whether it's whether to call it a judgment or an arbitration of sorts. Whether it's been an attempt at delivering justice or an attempt at settling something just for the sake of settling it with least collateral damage. That is my primary question, and I have not been able to reconcile on that part to begin with.
Which is fair. My the thing that I have been thinking about since the judgment is that in our living memory, there used to be a structure there. You can call it a mosque, but you cannot deny it that a structure created by the Mughals was there, right? And in our
Yes,
living memory, the structure was brought down. First of all, a structure of historical importance, which like 500, 550 years old structure. Secondly, it's not even the structure per se, but the whole idea that that structure had, right? The idea that even though India has been divided and even though a part of India is now a different country, or two different countries rather now, dominated by Muslims. The India that stays is still a country that cohabits all faiths, all religions, and all kinds of opinions. And that, when the structure was brought down, that idea was brought down with it as well. And there is no closure for that. I
And
have,
on camera, broad daylight,
yeah.
just the entire act, uh, that idea was brought down in broad daylight, just to add to that.
Hmm. Definitely. I mean, if if a group of people with such a huge mandate, even in 92, like it seemed like a lot of the people identifying with the Hindu faith were supporting this. So with such a mandate in basically what was reduced to a banana republic, it doesn't matter if it is daylight or night. I mean, they, in fact, doing it in daylight shows you how weak our institutions were. Anyway, so this structure was brought down. Post this, a number of riots happened. There were primarily the riots that are the most famous are the 93 riots in Bombay, and then the Bombay bomb blasts.
Yeah.
Everybody knows who did the bomb blasts, and everybody knows who was behind the riots. The only comparison that I can give you is that 2 years ago, Yaqub Memon, who is allegedly one of the person who worked to have the bomb blast happen, was hanged.
And
You will definitely think, as a sane, rational person, okay, so the if he was the culprit for the bomb blast and he was hanged, what happened to the people who were culprit for the riots? Nothing.
nothing.
When they died, they were draped in tricolor and paraded as if, and that, uh, I don't know. So I don't know when Thakre, which date Thakre died, but basically the only punishment that anybody ever got was a Shiv Sena MLA called Madhukar Satpodar, who's passed away a few years ago. He was fined
Hmm.
15,000 rupees. So this is the state of justice in our country, and it's not after Modi. I'm talking about Madhukar Satpodar fine happened before Modi, and Yaqub Memon was um, hanged after Modi, but the judgment or the case went on for much longer. So there will be a temple built, mandir wahi banega. However, what kind of closure will those families get whose relatives died during the riots? Or even for a moment, think about a young Muslim in India growing up right now. When he or she looks at this, how do they feel? um,
So
any
in
thoughts?
in in in, in my mind, this judgment uh, absolutely offers no closure to begin with. Let us be categorical about that part. And what was the hurry in the first place? Like, having waited all these years, I don't think the dispute about who the land goes to is as important as justice being delivered in these other two cases that you mentioned. First,
Exactly.
the act of bringing that mosque down, and second, all those people who were involved in those riots, and offering justice to first those two incidents, I think, uh, is primarily should have been the focus of the judiciary in this country, and not settling the dispute of who this piece of land should go to. It is much more trivial in my head. Just offering, and it goes beyond like which faith, how many acres of land each faith gets. I think that is quite insignificant in my head, and a lot of people would say that this is coming from a point of view in which we don't really give a damn about religion, and faith doesn't have as much importance in our lives as it is to these people. And all that said and done, the idea of the Indian constitution being upheld is not something which we saw last week, basically.
Definitely, definitely. Now that we are talking, I feel, I mean, both of us come from the Hindu faith, even if, like, our
Prac-
names not practicing, but our names are clearly
But
identifiable.
practicing families, like
Yeah, practicing.
I have grown up practicing the religion,
Yeah,
to
same
just
here,
put.
same here.
Yeah.
And so what I'm trying to say is that perhaps we could have had someone from our group who's a Muslim to talk about it. But the thing that struck me the most, and again, this is anecdotal, and make of it what you will, but the thing that struck me most was before the judgment was about to come, I had few of my Muslim friends reach out to me. I mean, in general, talking, and
Mhm.
they told me they wanted the judgment to be Mandir because they were really afraid of their families back in India. They were afraid if the verdict is not Mandir, then the riots that will ensue, or not even the riot, like India has developed so much that now I don't think we will have outright riots anymore. What happens is the public isolation of the Muslim people that happens, which already happens,
with,
but
which begins with something like getting a flat in a
exactly,
non-Muslim
that was
locality.
exactly what I was thinking. But it will more intensify more. It will become more intense. I keep hearing of these stories, and again, anecdotal. And for any of you who are listening who disagrees, I think if you have a close Muslim friend, talk to them and corroborate. Don't go by what I'm saying. But like kids these days, third, fourth grade in school, if they are Muslims, they are being like, "Tu Pakistan se hai," is being
Mm.
asked, which which is very sad. I don't remember
But
this happening.
there's something else I wanted to add on this. So this is one reason why everyone is hailing this judgment. When I say everyone, I'm referring to the so-called liberal media. People like, for example, Shekhar Gupta on Cut the Clutter mentioned how this was the best way or the most practical way this thing could have been settled. But is that really the job of the court? The
The judgment.
that also, that shows you, if
Oh,
the court
the way
is,
the
if the,
judgment was given. Yeah.
yeah, the way the judgment was given, this way of somehow pleasing everybody or pleasing nobody is not the way the court should look at a problem, right? Because if you were to deliver a judgment that way, there are two things it says. It says that the law and order of this country is not strong enough to withstand uh, r- any kind of antisocial reactions had the judgment gone the other way, for example. And second, it shows that the government of the day has absolutely no will in controlling that, and the judiciary knows that, if this is how they thought about this entire process when
So
they handled it.
I don't want to speculate, but one thing that does come to my mind is that
No, I'm talking about it from the perspective that if this is what makes you happy about the judgment, that there were no riots after that, I think you're expecting too little from your country, and you have really low standards for your
so
country.
I completely agree with you. But here's my thing, Aditya. And again, I am not endorsing Shekhar Gupta's or anybody's view, but this is what our country is now. This is like the bar is has gone very low. Anyway, going back to the judgment, um, Ranjan Gogoi was one of the dissident justices a few years ago when four justices came out against Justice Mishra,
Mishra.
and then there was an accusation of sexual assault, even rape, against Ranjan Gogoi, and that
Mm.
he destroyed the family of one of his um, admin assistants. And then he was made the judge to preside over the case against him. So Bharat Mata Ki Jai, and then he presided over this judgment. Again, I'm just telling everybody the chain of events. I'm not speculating anything, but dal and kala, and I don't know. I mean,
Basically, uh, and if you look at how this judgment was handled, it is like, it basically pits one faith against the other, right? It's word of mouth or travelogues from one set of people versus the same account from another set of people. And how do you settle a dispute like this? And in such a case, the only thing that should hold precedence is what stood there on that day in independent India. And sadly, like, looking at it very dispassionately, there is only one structure that stood there
Yeah,
when India was independent. And should we
exactly.
even be, yeah.
No, I completely agree. And so here are a few things that that bug me. That first of all, do you remember? Like, I mean, both of us followed the whole verdict pretty much together
Mm.
online. Once the verdict came out at the Supreme Court, the lawyers of the Supreme Court outside the Supreme Court started shouting "Jai Shri Ram,"
Hmm.
which in itself says a lot. Secondly, the people like Shekhar Gupta who are saying "Chalo acha hua," peaceful resolution. See, you can say all these things when you have nothing on stake.
Hmm. On
There,
stake, yeah.
no riot, no killing, no lynching will ever affect you, me, or Shekhar Gupta. I'm
Exactly.
appalled that we are, I mean, putting ourselves in the same bracket as that news dalal. Anyway, um, but I just like it's such a privileged opinion, and of course we come from that background as well. But it's such a privileged opinion. कि चलो जो हुआ अच्छा हुआ.
Even for us to have the privilege to speak is something which most people do not have, I
And the
think.
thing is, most Muslims do
Because,
not have it right now. Like what we are
yeah,
saying right now, if this was being said by a Muslim, they would have like we are anti-nationals of course, Bharat Mata Ki
yeah.
Jai, but
Mm.
if it was said by a Muslim, I mean, I don't think any Muslim in India right now has the courage to say it because it's not just them, it's their family. I was talking to one of my friends who posts a lot of very interesting, thought provoking stuff on Facebook, but his profile is private.
Mm.
So only a limited set of friends can see him. I said that the things that you post should be read by others, make it public. And he said, who will defend my family if something happens? You. So this is where we are right now. Rana, you tweeted something, and Amethi police.
Mm. Yeah,
Um,
immediately went after her and said, pull it down. Yeah. Yeah.
um, the day of the judgment, the night of the judgment rather, in India, Justice Gogoi took all of his colleagues for dinner at Taj.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. Mission accomplished. Yeah.
Mission accomplished. I mean, I have so much to say, and I have.
And we have almost, like, we have a feeling of sense of exhaustion having spoken about it even outside of the podcast for so
Yeah.
long now. I think that has resulted in something. So, but there is another thing which I found very striking is no one in popular media raised this question as to how the verdict could have been completely different had the mosque stood there today. Or would it have been any different? Would the court have ordered the mosque to have been, the structure to have been pulled down and a new structure to have been created there? Would that have been the case had the mosque still stood there?
I don't know the answer to this question, and this is a question that we've talked about at length before.
And this is the question that bugs me the most, because you cannot have a system where you have some kind of some a hysteresis of sorts, like, you, depending on where you are right now, you will have two completely different paths. I don't think justice should work that way,
Yeah,
sadly.
justice should stand independent of whether there was a structure or not.
Structure or not.
Completely.
Because especially when a judgment actually goes out there and says that the act of pulling it down was illegal, uh, this seems, there is a lot about this judgment which doesn't quite make sense. So I just leave it at that. And this fundamental question hasn't even been raised on any of our popular media platforms. That is where we are right now. So,
If there was a structure, so the India that we live in,
mhm.
this thing, this judgment that happened would not that whole thing would not have happened if the structure was in place. What I'm trying to say is कि
Yeah,
जिस वर्ल्ड में जिस इंडिया में हम रह रहे हैं वहां पे वो स्ट्रक्चर गिराया ही जाएगा 100 आउट
जाएगा.
ऑफ 100 टाइम्स
स्ट्रक्चर
बिफोर
का एग्जिस्ट
द कोर्ट.
the if you had 100 such instances, or you had 100 such universes where this happens, there is only one universe probably there that the structure stands. So yeah, that's true.
As a great man once said, मंदिर बनेगी तो जमीन तो समतल करनी ही पड़ेगी.
Padegi. And that man is now the icon of
Don't even
the,
get me
the the liberal face of BJP right now.
even get me started on that. One more thing before we wrap up this segment. So, Ministry of External Affairs released a paper on this verdict because a lot of countries, including Bangladesh and Finland and other countries, expressed concern about what is happening in India. So they released like a 10-point memo of how this was based on, this was a title dispute and not a dispute of faith, and how the constitution gives equal rights to all religious religion, and I mean across all religions for all citizens of India. However, no mention of 1992, not even a
Mhm.
point, as if it never
Be-
happened.
Because that is how this entire thing has changed, right? It went from the Babri Masjid demolition to the Ayodhya verdict, basically. So that's how even the title of this entire thing has changed, right? So the way we refer to this entire case has completely changed over the years. So what has taken precedence is Ayodhya Mandir debate and not the masjid demolition case. So that's how the whole rhetoric has shifted.
I will end it with a small quote by Rana Ayub, the greatest villain of our times, of course. She says, after the judgment, that my country chose to other me and millions of Muslims yet again, paving the way for right wing Hindu nationalism to fulfill its dream of a Hindu Rashtra. The perpetrators of the destruction and violence that claimed more than 1,000 Muslims' lives in 1992 were invited to celebrate and not atone for their crimes. Muslims in India fear that this would indeed be the beginning of reimagining India with Muslims as second class citizens, as envisaged by the right wing supremacist. I wonder if that cherished freedom holds any meaning in the new India that seeks to erase my legacy and my existence. I think with this, I think there is nothing more that you and I can say that she does not say.
Except for Bharat Mata Ki Jai.
Bharat Mata Ki Jai.
Welcome back, guys. As I always say, and as I will keep saying till the day of my death, Bharat Mata Ki Jai.
Jai Maharashtra also.
Jai Maharashtra for this segment as well. Thank you so much. So, in this segment, we talk about what is happening in Maharashtra, and how Amit Shah seemingly is not able to do what he does so easily. Like, Amit Shah is like Ashwin right now in like playing a test match in Australia.
MCG.
He's just not sure what exactly is happening. Anyway, um, I think Aditya, you as a native of that state, can help us get a rundown of what is exactly happening.
So basically, we are a month down the line now since the election results came out. You had Shiv Sena and BJP, the pre-poll alliance, comfortably crossing the majority. But Shiv Sena and BJP being Shiv Sena and BJP, in the last 5 years, they've just been bickering with each other. And Shiv Sena has been the most vociferous of all opponents, even more than the actual Indian opposition right now.
Yeah.
So that has been Shiv Sena's role all these 5 years. And they have conveniently, in these 5 years, always teamed up whenever there was an election, whenever there was the BMC elections, there was the state elections, or the Lok Sabha. And since the day of these results, Uddhav Thackeray, someone who we never saw as a very authoritative figure when it comes to Maharashtra politics, he never uh, had that imprint that, say, Bal Thackeray obviously had, or even Raj Thackeray has, like the oratory skills. So you had Uddhav Thackeray coming out and saying that they would not settle for anything less than 2.5 years of chief ministership, which, according to the BJP, is something which was never spoken of before the elections. So now we have a situation where for 2 weeks the governor actually doesn't invite anyone to form a government.
Hmm.
And the BJP is quietly confident that this thing would be settled, as most Shiv Sena BJP disputes have been settled, and governments have formed in the last 5 years. So I think Amit Bhai expected that to happen. But this time something different happened. You had Uddhav Thackeray standing up to Amit Bhai for once, and probably for the first time in the last 5 years that anyone has stood up to the BJP and its bullying. And they've actually gone ahead and said that they wouldn't form a government with BJP because they are being accused of lying to the people, and that BJP actually promised them 2.5 years of chief ministership. And this is where we are at now. So we had Sharad Pawar coming out and issuing a statement saying that the people's mandate is for them to be in the opposition, and that is what they would do. But suddenly things changed in the last 10 days, and it looks like Sharad Pawar now was willing to form a government with the BJP, and not just form a government. It has come to a point now where they probably might get 2.5 years of chief ministership themselves. And at one point you had the Congress not being on the same page, and now we are hearing that Congress might get 5 years of deputy chief ministership. So this is the khichdi that we are in right now. And in the middle of all this, we had Maharashtra having one of the worst agricultural years this year, and a lot of crop damage due to the cyclone that happened last month. And basically, that is, as always, has been put to the back burner.
Who cares?
So this is where we are at right now. So there is on one hand this ideological inconsistency debate, wherein how does the Congress survive, or what happens to the secular ideology if they team up with the Shiv Sena, and that is what the BJP is accusing the other side of, calling them opportunistic and so on, and conveniently forgetting the fact that they did essentially exactly the same in Bihar, right? Where
No, 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 no. Let me correct you, Aditya.
hmm,
This is opportunistic. When BJP does this, it is political genius.
political
Carry on.
Chanakya,
Yeah.
it is. Amit Shah hailed as Chanakya, but it's still, we do not have clarity of whether a government will actually be formed. And Congress has always not very proactive. You had Ahmed Patel and Mallikarjun Kharge going to Maharashtra, having their own. So Congress works at a different pace these days, right? So they ride an auto rickshaw when the others are driving a Ferrari. So
So, my the thing that I am thinking about over all of this is, so first of all, big fan of khichdi. Big fan
mhm.
of khichdi governments. I think they are the best, even if progress is slow. Um, it's
No, the khichdi I'm referring to is the fact that we don't have a government so far. I have absolutely no issues with multiple voices being represented in a government.
exactly. But my question to you is, let's say let's say Shiv Sena, NCP, and Congress get into um, forming a government and get to govern for the next 5 years. How will that impact the elections that happen in 5 years? How will, more importantly, will shifts as someone who's not from there, I look at it and I feel that a lot of upper caste Hindu voters who vote for Shiv Sena will just move to BJP. What do you reckon?
Potential, Potentially not, because I feel that the Shiv Sena and the BJP still have slightly different vote banks, because the Shiv Sena came into being not as a Hindutva party, if we remember. They came into being on the plank of, first they were actually this set of gundas who were empowered by Congress themselves, ironically, back in the day,
Yeah,
to fight the communists in and get get control over the trade unions in Maharashtra,
just
and
because,
then
let me
they
just for a moment,
yeah,
but
yeah.
someday we should talk about Maharashtra has had a great tradition of communism, yeah. I don't
Yes.
like it just anyway. I'm not a
Hmm.
communist. Bharat Mata Ki Jai. You carry on.
Yeah. Yeah. So from there, so Shiv Sena is this being which continues to metamorphosize depending on what the political situation is. So they saw opportunism in this Hindutva politics at one point, and so they changed into being a Hindutva party. Then for a long time they fought the North Indians. So they came
South
into being
Indian.
first with the anti-South Indian
Hmm.
agenda, and then they changed into Hindutva, and then the anti-North Indian. So
Yeah.
they keep changing planks depending on what the need of the hour is. So I won't be surprised if Shiv Sena tomorrow becomes a secular party to begin with. So I don't think Shiv Sena has had any ideological continuum in any case. So and their vote bank is slightly different to BJP. Given Shiv Sena actually restricts itself to the urban centers of Maharashtra. Shiv Sena doesn't have a lot of presence in the rural Maharashtra, for example. So
Hmm.
Mumbai and Pune and Nashik are these belts where Shiv Sena would be at its strongest, and in these areas the Maratha vote bank, the Marathi vote speaking vote bank, is not the same as BJP's vote bank actually.
Okay.
So places like Dadar and parts of Maharashtra which are Maratha strongholds, uh, probably BJP doesn't have the face for that. With Devendra Fadnavis, they had a chief minister's face, but I still believe that Shiv Sena would still have a part of vote that is frozen. They may not be able to form a government on their own, but they still have a potential vote share which is still frozen and which might be difficult for the BJP to pull entirely towards itself.
S- Um, I mean, you are from there, so I defer to your opinion. I just feel that, I mean, this whole move will, a right-wing friend of mine uh, said once, not a friend, sorry, a right-wing acquaintance of mine once said, कि even if BJP loses, BJP wins. And this is how I see this, because I feel that BJP will go back to the public and be like, Shiv Sena was not pure enough. Look at them. And in national politics, they will
And
go.
and just to add to that, and the
Hmm.
BJP vote bank is dumb enough to actually believe it and look
Yeah,
beyond their opportunistic government formations in the recent past.
not
So
dumb, political genius. Okay.
political genius, yeah. Hmm.
And more importantly, at national level, they will say that what did Congress do? Like they have like, and that is the thing for someone like me who would normally vote for Congress, obviously, because where I come from, Congress is the only viable alternative to BJP. And
And
I
I
will,
would never vote for Shiv Sena myself. So yeah.
yeah. So it is a really, it is a bit challenging for me to accept what is happening, and
Yeah, I agree completely, but there is another subtext subplot to this,
hmm,
which is that Shiv Sena's existence entirely, almost entirely, relies on whether they have control over the BMC or not. And at the BMC right now, they have uh, control over the BMC in alliance with the BJP still. I don't know which way that will go because Shiv Sena makes all of its money from the BMC, which has a budget of like something like a small state would. So I don't know which way that is going right now. And even if you assume that they last for 5 years, as you said, I think that would be the foremost priority for these parties because their survival is at stake in any case. So whether they form this government or do not form this government, they have had a lot of defections from NCP and Congress to
yeah,
Shiv Sena and BJP in the lead up to these elections. So, to a point where they had absolutely nothing to fight for in this case, and this was
mother,
one of the weakest election campaigns in the
as we've talked about.
as we have talked about in the recent past. And for them to even have a whiff of forming a government, that short term benefit far outgrows like what the long term losses might be. And for a BJP to even lose a big state like this,
Hmm.
despite having fought an election wherein the opposition seemingly had absolutely no choice or no chance to win the election, I think the
Hmm.
short term benefits far outgrow, and I think they outweigh the losses
Um, i-
in my head.
Alternatively, I mean, I agree. Alternatively, if we look at the relationship between Shiv Sena and BJP through time, I think um, मनोहर जोशी early 90s से लेकर अभी तक
Hmm.
didn't, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't have the numbers in front of me, didn't Shiv Sena used to be the bigger player and slowly over
Shiv
time
Sena
BJP
till
became the
24, yes, till 2014, I think Shiv Sena was the bigger player. So 2014 they fought the elections separately before, so they didn't have a pre-poll alliance, and BJP got the bigger numbers definitely. And Shiv Sena had around 50 seats even in 2014, so their numbers haven't changed. So the reason I said that Shiv Sena will still retain a fair share of the uh, vote share is because of the 2014 observation. So they seem to have this 15-20% vote share, which seems to be frozen. And for the BJP to actually pull that entirely in their direction might not be very easy. So while Shiv Sena might not be good enough to form governments,
Hmm.
they have obviously relegated to being the smaller partner. They can still inflict a lot of damage to BJP. So
I
that is what I see.
I've also heard this notion, and I'd like you to kind of elaborate on it. Is that had BJP and Shiv Sena gone in as planned to make the government this time, there would have been no Shiv Sena by the end of this 5 year.
Potentially, potentially, because this is what has happened in other states also, where wherein the BJP has started off as the junior partner and gradually
Yeah.
become the senior partner and then completely eaten into so the junior partners votes. So I think for Shiv Sena, one of the ways you have to look at it is that it is make or break in more ways than one. So the fact that they've gone into an alliance like this uh, tells you a lot about how the BJP has treated. So, and there is also something more anecdotal, which this entire bickering between the Sena and the BJP, despite the fact that they have control over all the levels of power there, from the municipalities to the center, the fact is that this bickering has absolutely resulted in no development in Mumbai and Maharashtra in these last 5 years. At least urban development, a lot of urban infrastructure projects have been stalled or not in very good shape, and and a lot of their MLAs and corporators say that uh, they do face issues with, uh, say, a Shiv Sena corporator and an BJP MP, for example. So these things do not really work out well for them in any case. So, and the Shiv Sena is not the cleanest party in any case. I'd like to
Who
point
is
out. So
so first of all, ideological purity. I don't think
I don't think it matters
there is
anymore.
any political party in this country that has any kind of ideological purity. I was listening to what you were saying, and I was thinking about, um, had I been a political consultant, um, I would have I would have told Congress, I cannot be a political consultant because I cannot take all clients. I'll never take BJP as a client, but potentially Congress, because again, ideology currently in this country doesn't matter. But I would have told Congress that in states like MP and UP, basically the Hindi belt, where there is a Hindutva, like there is a sizable Hindutva population, uh, if you are able to break BJP and politicians leaving BJP, don't have them come back to Congress. Ensure that Shiv Sena is supporting you in all these states and have them come back to Shiv Sena, and let
Mm.
Shiv Sena be a counterbalance to BJP in this state, while you keep some distance from Shiv Sena. And when it comes to like election polling and all, have Shiv Sena support you from outside, and that will potentially, because the way India is right now, um, this is how politics develops, right?
Yes.
A party becomes bigger and bigger and bigger, and then they split on ideological lines, and then there's a realignment that happens. That is what happened with Congress in the 80s and early 90s, and basically this, right? So
And also to point out, Shiv
mm,
Sena this time fought an election which was slightly different. So Shiv Sena had hoardings in multiple different languages, which is a huge thing from a
very
party like Shiv Sena.
unprecedented.
They had ads in Tamil and Bengali and Gujarati and
there are
Punjabi and all these things,
there are
which
that
is,
many people, like I'm guessing you're talking about Bombay.
yeah.
There have to
So
be.
even for Bombay, for Shiv Sena to acknowledge that there are other people is something, and reaching out to them for votes is something which would never have happened in the past. So they are gradually somehow realigning themselves to, and probably this is something which has come out through Aditya Thackeray's tweets and stuff also in the last
Mhm.
year or so, where they were the ones to actually protest RA despite being in the government.
They,
Something which sounds very
as we've discussed in the last episode, the only credible opposition that could come against BJP will be from people who don't have to prove their Hindu identity, or
Hindu identity.
and just like Raj Thakre, Shiv Sena also does not need anyone's certificate to prove that they are Hindu. Or
So I'll pose this question to you on that.
mm,
So do you think that if the Congress allies with the Shiv Sena,
mhm.
given the fact that even the Congress is on the brink of having no existence in Maharashtra politics, if they do not have a government now, they don't seem to have any phase there.
Mhm.
So do you think the least they can gain from this is to show the people that they are not anti-Hindu at the very least,
So
if they
this is a
if they
great
ally with
question, and
the Sena?
this is, I think, this will be more than Congress. This will be IT cell's dilemma. Because the IT cell has basically all of their forwards end up that Congress, Muslim appeasement
Muslim.
Congress, right? This is
Hmm. Hmm.
everything that they are about. Now, if the IT cell starts a campaign against Congress by saying they are not ideologically pure, they aligned with Shiv Sena,
Hmm.
they will kind of hurt themselves, because then their old thing about Congress Muslims, there's an like incongruity, right, in
and
both of
and,
these arguments.
there is no way that they can convince people that Shiv Sena is anti-Hindu, given the
E-
number of riots they have inflicted on people. So
However, see, imagine, like, this is this is what it has come to, that Shiv Sena cannot be anti-Hindu because they did riots. But however, my honest take is that right now our polity is made in such a way that there are a few buzzwords, right? Appeasement
Hmm.
is one buzzword, corruption is another buzzword. So what will
Hmm.
happen is that Shiv Sena, by aligning with NCP in Congress, IT cell will use the argument against Shiv Sena that Shiv Sena is corrupt.
which
Now
has
all of
already
you,
begun.
yeah,
Which
now
has
all
already
of the
begun. Yeah. Hmm.
BMC problems and everything, Shiv Sena will be blamed. And eventually what will happen is, when so most of the times when your and mine right wing people that are around us in our family, when they use the word corrupt, it doesn't mean anything, because again, everyone is corrupt. But what they're trying to say is that it's not just that they're corrupt, but they're also, in my opinion, anti-Hindu, and I don't like them, so I will use the term corrupt. So that under the umbrella of that big word,
Which is the
Shiv
excuse
Sena
for
and
Yediyurappa, by the way.
yeah, Shiv Sena will get in, and I think maybe I'm too negative, but I think Shiv Sena will lose their Hindu credibility much before Congress gains any Hindu credibility. That's how it is. One last thing that I kind of wanted to quickly touch on around this election: who is the biggest Congress leader in Maharashtra today?
They have no face, sadly. So even till they had Vilasrao Deshmukh, they at least had a face. Right now, they have a lot of regional leaders. The fact that someone like Prithviraj Chavan actually held to his seat in itself is a big achievement for the Congress. So that says a lot. Guys like Ashok Chavan and Prithviraj Chavan are not sure of holding on to their own seats. So beyond that, they do not have a leader actually, sadly. It's hard to find a face, which is why they had to piggyback onto Sharad Pawar to fight this election. It was Pawar's election more than anyone
मानना
else's.
पड़ेगा लेकिन शरद पवार को, जो भी बोलो.
Pawar actually fought the election, and the Congress was just like Shiv Sena became the junior partner. In the Congress NCP alliance, the NCP has become the senior partner now.
We've
And just to
Mhm.
add, NCP has never had any of these ideological dilemmas ever.
Yeah,
I
yeah, and
don't think I don't think they care about going with the Shiv Sena or even with the BJP if the need arises. So
that's Sharad Pawar, and that's Indian politics for you. I mean, anybody who tells me about this, and again, my memories are short, and WhatsApp was not here always, but in 1989, to make sure that Congress does not form government at the center, BJP allied with the Communist Party of India, Marxists, to support Chandrasekhar and then VP Singh to to form governments at the center. So please, I mean, please, Bharat
and
Mata Ki Jai.
And if you have time, go back and listen to Subramaniam Swami's interview from that era.
Exactly. So I think we should move on to our next segment.
Jai Hind, Jai Maharashtra.
Jai Maharashtra. Moving on. Um, Before we start this segment, I just wanted to read an excerpt from a letter that Harishankar Persai wrote in 1977. The letter was titled "ये चिट्ठी महात्मा मोहनदास करमचंद गांधी को पहुंचे." He writes, गोडसे को भगत सिंह का दर्जा देने की कोशिश चल रही है. गोडसे ने हिंदू राष्ट्र के विरोधी गांधी को मारा था. गोडसे जब भगत सिंह की तरह राष्ट्रीय हीरो हो जाएगा, तब 30 जनवरी का क्या होगा? अभी तक ये गांधी निर्वाण दिवस है. आगे गोडसे गौरव दिवस हो जाएगा. इस दिन कोई राजघाट नहीं जाएगा. फिर भी आपको याद जरूर किया जाएगा. जब 30 जनवरी को गोडसे की जय जयकार होगी, तब ये तो बताना ही पड़ेगा कि उसने कौन सा महान कर्म किया था. बताया जाएगा कि उस दिन वीर ने गांधी को मार डाला था. तो आप गोडसे के बहाने याद किए जाएंगे. अभी तक गोडसे को आपके बहाने याद किया जाता था. एक महान पुरुष के हाथों मरने का कितना फायदा मिलेगा आपको? लोग पूछेंगे, ये गांधी कौन था? जवाब मिलेगा, वही जिसे गोडसे ने मारा. आगे चलकर जनता पार्टी पूरी तरह जनसंघ हो जाएगी. तब 30 जनवरी को ये महत्व होगा. इस दिन परमवीर राष्ट्रभक्त गोडसे ने गांधी को मारा. इस पुण्य के प्रताप से इसी दिन जनता पार्टी का जन्म हुआ, जिसने हिंदू राष्ट्र की स्थापना की. इधर आपको और तरह से अमर बनाने की कोशिश हो रही है. पिछली दिवाली पर दिल्ली के जनसंघी शासन ने सस्ती मोमबत्ती सप्लाई कराई थी. मोमबत्ती के पैकेट पर आपका फोटो था. फोटो में आप आरएसएस के ध्वज को प्रणाम कर रहे हैं. पीछे हेडगेवार खड़े हैं. एक ही कमी रह गई है. आगे पूरी हो जाएगी. अगली बार आपको हाफ पैंट पहना दिया जाएगा और भगवा टोपी पहना दी जाएगी. आप मजे में आरएसएस के स्वयंसेवक के रूप में अमर हो सकते हैं. आगे वही अमर होगा जिसे जनसंघ करेगा. बाकी भी ठीक चल रहा है. आप जो लाठी छोड़ गए थे, उसे चरण सिंह ने हथिया लिया है. चौधरी साहब इस लाठी को लेकर जवाहरलाल नेहरू का पीछा कर रहे हैं. जहां नेहरू को पा जाते हैं, एक दो हाथ दे देते हैं. जो भी नेहरू की नीतियों की वकालत करता है, उसे चौधरी साहब आपकी लाठी से मार देते हैं. तो महात्मा जी, जो कुछ उम्मीद है, बाला साहब देवरस से है. वो जो करेंगे, वही आपके लिए होगा. वैसे काम चालू हो गया है. आप बेफिक्र रहिए. आपका यश किसी न किसी रूप में सुरक्षित रहेगा. परसाई रचनावली 4, राजकमल प्रकाशन. A few names that people might have not recognized would I think would be Hedgewar. Hedgewar was the first Sarsang Chalak of RSS. He was the founder of RSS. Balasaheb Devras was the Sarsang Chalak of RSS during the 70s. Both of them proud Marathi Brahmins. Um, and yeah, I just wanted to read this because although this was written in 1977, I feel nothing has changed.
This is
Everything
like
is
a
the same.
dystopian novel coming
Yeah.
through.
All the characters might have changed, but everything is just the same. Um,
That
yeah,
even if you look at how the Hindu Mahasabha back in the day, during the first elections, campaigned against Nehru, even that hasn't changed today. It's just that Nehru is no longer alive. The campaigns still are the same.
so which brings us to our current segment, and our current segment is actually Veer Mahatma Godse Amar Rahe and Nehru Hai Hai. So over the last week, we had two great days, or one great and one not so great. Obviously, the great day was
Good
the
day.
the martyrdom of Veer Nathuram Godse. I'm just making Veer just by myself. I know Veer is for Savarkar, but I don't really know what to call Godse Saab.
Just to be
Godse.
safe.
Yeah,
Sure.
Bharat Mata Ki Jai. Also, Nehru's birthday was on November 14th. Sad day for India, I guess. So, before, I mean, to start, when I say Nehru, what it means to you?
It means that India, to begin with, at that point, for all the mistakes that he committed, stood for the right things when we were born as a nation post independence. That is the first thing that comes to mind. And for someone who had the benefit of having done science in India all these years, I come from an institution which has Nehruvian legacies.
Yeah,
So in some way, my life has directly been impacted by the decisions that were taken uh, in the budding phase of Republic of India, some sense.
Definitely. You've read
And
Discovery of India?
yeah, I've read it. Yeah.
You were saying something, sorry.
Yeah, so just to add to the science part, so something which completely like if you look at a lot of people who wrote about India in the early 1950s and so on, you had this guy JBS Haldane who moved to India, right? He
Yeah.
was an evolutionary biologist and a guy who gave biology, molecular and cell biology, a lot of its founding ideas. You had a person like that moving to India because he felt at that time it was symbolic of all that is liberal and chaotic about the world, and the freedom of thought. He held India in that level. So if you had a country at that point which was at least seen by people from outside, people of that pedigree, through those lenses, I think that tells you something about the leadership at that time.
So it does. So you read Discovery of India, right?
Yeah.
Now tell me, is Discovery of India better or is Exam Warriors better?
See, Exam Warriors is easier to read, so definitely that is better. क्या फायदा है ऐसे बुक का जो पढ़ने में बहुत
जो
टाइम
ट्वीट
लगता
ना
है,
कर सके.
जो ट्वीट ना कर पाओ तुम.
Nehru said in Discovery of India that
Not in Exam Warriors. Yeah,
it is
just to
science
clarify.
alone. It is science alone that can solve the problems of hunger and poverty, of insanitation and illiteracy, of superstition and deadening custom and tradition, of vast resources running to waste, or a rich country inhabited by starving people who indeed could afford to ignore science. Who indeed could afford to ignore science today? At every turn, we have to seek its aid. The future belongs to science and those who make friends with science. और फिर किसी ने कहा कि क्लाइमेट चेंज नहीं है, लोगों को ठंड लग रही है.
So much so that हमारे कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन में साइंटिफिक टॉलरेंस के लिए we have mention of that in our constitution, huh?
Nehru is everything that India is not. So I agree with a lot of what BJP says. Nehru is this guy who was Western educated, lived in England, school and university, um, Fabian socialist, and who was not really religious, and it was not in vogue to proclaim out aloud in public. But I very much think that he was an atheist.
He was an
Anyway,
atheist,
yeah,
and quite obviously so.
yeah. I mean, if you read Discovery of India, you'll realize that. Having said that, so he was influenced by Western liberal democracy, and he wanted to make India like one of them. And the constitution, which was created by all these people, including Dr. Ambedkar, who were again primarily Western educated, feel does not reflect the country as it was or as it is today. Even not to say that the constitution is not the book that we should follow, but I just think that we are not yet there to actually live by what that book says. Um, in that regard, I think the writer of Exam Warrior is much more of what India is. He grew from the
He
bottom of the Indian
So he has
society
a
chain,
rooted understanding, his people.
and with all his misplaced anger on the Lutyens and all his bigotry and everything that he megalomania and to that show off nature, it is all actually Indian. On the opposite,
And
on the contrary, Nehru and everything that he did was very alien to the common Indian.
it
India,
was more of it was more of an aspirational idea in their head rather than what it actually was representing. So they didn't really represent their voices, but they were more aspirational in how they saw their country going ahead. So that's
yeah,
the difference.
I mean,
Whereas Papaji is more representative and less aspirational in that sense.
Papaji is more he's aspirational in his way, where he reflects are the people that we know much more than Nehru could. Like, I don't think that people would sit for a Nehru speech um,
Hmm.
unless they're forced to. I mean, and when I say people, I mean in general. But
Hmm.
when Modi speaks, it's like an uncle at the Pangi Tapri is
और
talking,
और एक शादी में आया हुआ फूफा जी who
Fufaji
जिन
Bas, which is interesting, which is funny. Nehru is basically Satyajit Ray and Modi is Rohit Shetty. That's anyway.
and it has nothing to do with the language.
Yeah,
This
exactly, exactly.
speech wala thing has nothing to do with the language in which they speak. It has more to do with what resonates more with the people.
He Nehru is deeply introspective. He's examining his life, his choices, the country that he is in, at every moment, and that is why sometimes you also feel that he's slow in taking decisions, because he thinks, and he thinks too much, and I mean, there's nothing like thinking too much, but like, he is very aware of implications of anything that he does, of especially for this very very young country. In a lot of ways he reminds me a bit of Obama, because for all of Obama's sins, he was a black man as the president of America. He knew that whatever he does reflects on the black stereotypes, and he has to be extremely careful, and therefore he came across as much more pliable and much more
Hmm.
agreeable, or trying to agree to the
Hmm.
Republican demands, and for which some on the left admonish him. But I just kind of understand where this guy comes from, and similarly for Nehru.
At
uh,
some point, I don't know. At some level, I feel Nehru as Papaji aspires to be Nehru deep within his heart in terms of his acceptance in some level, like acceptance in the sense like this posturing of himself as Desh ke Papa and
Kaka
things like
also, that video.
going around the world with big crowds following him and so on. Somewhere, if there is a legacy which he wants to erase, it is Nehru's legacy.
So I agree. So I don't like. I know you are into Bollywood as much as I am. So you know Sanjay Gupta, right? The guy who he
Yes.
makes movies, right?
Ye-
So he makes
yes, yes.
movies. Like he made a
Kante.
remake of Reservoir Dogs, and he has made other such movies of remakes of Hollywood movies. So his remakes of Hollywood movies are basically completely lifted from whatever Hollywood movie he's remaking,
Hmm.
and because it's completely lifted, there is like the context is always lacking. The characters and what motivates them is very difficult to understand. And and Modi is Nehru in that regards, in the sense that jab hum he looks at Nehru, and he looks at Nehru's life, and he looks at how Nehru was revered, and he wants to be that guy. But what he fails to see is the foundational aspect that made Nehru Nehru. I've read Gujarat Files, and I know that Modi also wants to be Obama. So he
Hmm.
keeps Obama's books in his living room, especially if someone he thinks is important is coming to meet him. The books will be like in a place where, like almost like Trump, actually, in a place where people can see that there are these books. I doubt that he has read even one of them, but it is important for him s- that people think that he has read them, and that is exactly what is his desire to be like Nehru is. He
And his attempt at writing a book, I think the exam warriors thing is also, it stems from the fact that he wants to emulate Nehru
Nehru.
and somehow,
Huh.
yeah, yeah,
Huh.
at some level.
And maybe he will come up with more of such books in the future. But
Just
that
for the, just at least so that WhatsApp can say that पापा जी ने 10 book लिख दिया, something like that.
so yeah, so again I go back to this, that India became India in 1947, and there was another country that became a country, Pakistan, in 1947, which was from the beginning Islamic Republic of Pakistan. In fact, the whole motivation of Pakistan becoming Pakistan was primarily rooted in the idea that there has in India is has two countries in it, and the other country, that is Pakistan or the Muslims, need a separate homeland for themselves. And at that juncture, there were many forces, and I'm not just talking about the RSS because RSS was not as powerful back then, but there were many forces within Congress who wanted India to emulate Pakistan in becoming a Hindu Rashtra. Um, from Govind Ballabh Pant to even Patel to an extent. All of these people would not have had any problems had India, at least maybe not in name, but in practice, emulated a Hindu nation. It was Nehru and then the drafters of constitution like Dr. Ambedkar who ensured that,
who themselves were not always on the same page ideally,
yeah,
when it came to their ideas. So
and even Gandhi, because
even,
Gandhi was very powerful at that moment, and if he wanted, he could have basically said, because he was religious and he believed in, like, he was a proper Dadaji, right?
hmm, hmm,
Uh, and yet India became this country, this secular country. There was no need, but that is why this country is great for me. That is why whatever pride I used to feel for this country, whatever remnants of pride that I still have for this country is because,
because at a time when it was the easiest to take a decision of going the route of a Hindu Rashtra, we didn't decide to go that way. Because
exactly,
if at all there was a time when there was any justification for going down that route, it was then. And even then that country resisted the temptation of going down that route, which would have ensured perpetual power for these guys, right? First you had
yeah.
the sentiment that they fought against the British. Second, they if they pandered to the masses and the majority, that would have been the most prudent political decision to take at that time, and
and,
yet they
and,
did
and
not.
I still say that, and that Nehru was not a great or a good politician. When I say a good politician, I'm talking of the politicians in mold of someone like Pawar or Amit Shah, where
Hmm.
Nehru did not think of what makes sense politically. He relied on two things. One, he was very idealistic, and maybe partly the reason for a lot of his mistakes were because he was very idealistic. For example, China,
Hmm.
and he also wanted to make sure that India is a democracy where there is no majoritarianism. So, and therefore, he gave away some things like the states' rights on cow slaughter, directive principle, right?
Hmm.
Which some people criticize him for. If he were such a paragon of secularism, why is this in our constitution? And honestly, I don't have an answer for it, but I just think that as a Democrat, you have to give in
Somehow
to yeah, to where
the
people
middle
want.
ground
Yeah,
argument. Yeah.
but that idealism that he brought to
Hmm.
India during the birth of this nation is not the idealism that we as people have or have inherited, and that is why it was so easy to dismantle it with Ayodhya. Um, and uh, there is no political entity in India today that proves Jinnah right on every moment than BJP. Jinnah said that India has in it two countries, a country of Hindus and a country of Muslims. And there were Muslims who stayed behind and never moved to Pakistan. And every time BJP does anything, it is like looking in their face and proving that Jinnah was right. Um,
And over the years we have seen that the right wing is less critical of Jinnah than it is of Nehru.
yeah,
You would see that through through most of their speeches. I think there was even a BJP MP or an MLA who
Advani in
campaigned.
his book said, man.
Advani has written books about him, and you had some BJP MP last year saying that Jinnah was right, and Jinnah had Nehru given made way for power to and agreed with Jinnah, and we would have been a much better country or something like that. So it tells you as to why he is such a pantomime villain now in India. Because all that Nehru, by Nehru I mean all the founding fathers at that time stood for, is something which these people cannot stand as an idea. And when
I
you said about
completely agree.
pliability at that point, and don't you think, like, I think there is a quote which is attributed to Bertrand Russell, and I'm not sure if it is he who said that. So if it was someone else, please clarify it. Goes something to the effect of saying that the fundamental cause of trouble in this modern world is that the stupid are cocksure and the intelligent are full of doubt. So I don't know if this was. I think it is attributed to Russell, but I'm not sure. So
We were talking about the Dunning-Kruger effect recently, and yeah, that is evident. Or like maybe because maybe we have a podcast because we think we're so sure. But anyway, people are listening. We are talking.
so maybe we are stupid. So it's okay.
Yeah, it's okay. Just laugh at us. It's okay. Bharat Mata Ki Jai. So the most famous speech that Nehru gave
Hmm.
was the tryst with
Which
destiny.
Tavlin Singh doesn't like that, by the way. Tavlin Singh says that Nehru refers to it as the stroke of midnight hour. लेकिन हर जगह तो midnight
Uh,
नहीं था ना उस time पे. So she doesn't agree with it. She has actually said this on record.
कहाँ पे मिडनाइट नहीं था उस
हाँ,
वक्त?
जहाँ पे भी
यूएस में.
she is like, how
कहाँ?
did he assume that midnight hour और वर्ल्ड का रेफरेंस करते वक्त हाउ कैन ही से मिडनाइट, पूरे वर्ल्ड का एक मिडनाइट तो नहीं होता है, समथिंग लाइक दैट.
Like, but that speech, there's a thing that I find very interesting in that speech, going back to the dilemma or the doubting thing, huh? So this is a moment. This guy, as we say in millennial lingo, owns all the thunder. He can be as bombastic as he wishes to be, and he can like मोदी जी तो जीएसटी में मिडनाइट करने लगे थे. यहाँ पे तो मतलब इंडिया इंडिया बन रहा है, and this guy is standing there and he gives this speech, great speech. There's this line in this speech that I just wanted to read out aloud, which tells you
Not wholly or substantially, are you referring to that part?
that is also that is also there, but in the middle he says the ambition of the greatest man of our generation has been to wipe every tear from every
Hmm.
eye. He's talking about Mahatma Gandhi. The ambition of the greatest man of our generation has been to wipe every tear from every eye. That may be beyond us, but as long as there are tears and suffering, so long our work will not be over. So this guy, he he could say that. So to wipe every tear from every eye, and we let us make a pledge today that we
Hmm.
will do it. But he does not say that. He says that may be beyond us, but we will try. And that encapsulates Nehru for me, and that is why he is one of my personal heroes.
As unpopular as it may sound.
Yeah, I mean, I know. I mean, you're pilloried by both
Hmm.
the right, obviously,
Yes.
but also the left. Anyway,
And as I said, from on my personal level, I think I have a lot to thank for the Nehruvian legacy of India for where I am today at some level. It is the decisions that were taken at that point. Some level, people like me could pursue education to this level without having to sell their kidneys, basically. So, and look at the decisions that and the institutions that took shape at that phase in Indian history. Now, the IITs were a priority. There was, I think, freedom given to people and the kind of people that, who were hired that time. So you had the Indian Statistical Institute, as I said, Haldane, and guys like Mahalanobis, the
yeah, one of the
of
greatest thinkers.
modern India in some sense. And then you had the
Yeah.
election commission taking shape. All these institutions, which ironically played a role in offering a balance to the power of the government of the day. And you had the guys who had power of shaping these institutions who actually design checks and balances to their own power. So that tells you very easily all of them could have gone towards the direction of autocracy, right? It could have been so easily justified at that point.
Look at India now. I mean, the institutions are so pliable to the current dispensation. Imagine if,
No, at a
I
point
mean,
when the institutions didn't exist in the
the
first place, it, to create
To create
those.
those
Yeah.
institutions, to imagine, to yeah.
So that is the legacy for me.
I personally like, and soon, I mean, we are almost done with this segment as well, and soon we will move to recommendations. And I have a million recommendations. But if anyone who's listening to this has not read Discovery of India, please, please find a copy and read. I think every Indian should read that book.
My recommendation was also Discovery of India for today, but now that you already said that,
Discovery of India तो standing
हाँ,
recommendation है आज के
बट
लिए
वो
सर.
बहुत अनपॉपुलर बुक है ना, सुब्रमण्यम स्वामी के हिसाब से इट इज द मोस्ट इल इन्फॉर्म्ड बुक ऑफ हिस्ट्री.
सुब्रमण्यम स्वामी के हिसाब से अगर वो मोस्ट इल इन्फॉर्म्ड है तो फिर मतलब पढ़ना ही चाहिए आपको. You should read it. कोई any other recommendation that you might have
So
around?
this is nothing to do with politics. This is a much older book, Richard Dawkins
Hmm.
का The Ancestors Tale.
Oh my God.
It's a really fun read. So go ahead and read that. It's about what links you to the rest of this world in this age where you actually are bickering about the specifics of your identity. This book actually takes you on a pilgrimage to the past, and it refers to each species as a pilgrim. And on this journey, at different
Mhm.
time, different points in this entire timeline, different species join you to that pilgrimage. And I think that's a good read. So go ahead, and it's in some way disarms this entire narrative of segregation at some point. And there is no not a more powerful thought than actually coming to terms with the fact that not just the other human being next to you, but even the lowly cockroach that is walking around you is also uh, something that you are related to.
That's a great book. I haven't read that. I have read some of his other works, and I he has been one of the prominent figures who've made me think certain things that I thought were beyond the realms of even my thinking. I would like to recommend another book based off on our first segment, and it is Curfew Night by Basharat Peer. I just want for people to read it and to kind of take a stock of how we have treated a segment of our population. And for our last segment, and I think this book is not really readily available in India, but try and get a hand on An Indian Summer by Alex von Tunzelman. This is a book that the Congress tried to ban because they thought that it wrote about Nehru in ways that were not pleasing. And to me, reading this book made me fall in love with Nehru even more. So make of it what you will. And with that, I think we should close our podcast today. Bharat Mata Ki Jai.
Bharat Mata Ki Jai.